Okay, I hope everyone's back. Ashley, we'll go ahead and get started a couple minutes early because I don't want your time to be shorted because you've got some wonderful materials to present. So I want to turn it over to Ashley Kemp, who is the director for the Oklahoma Ethics Commission, and you've been there 3 years as the director?
I've actually been there almost 7 years as the director.
Well, I'm getting old and losing my memory, so it feels like it's just been a few years. You've been doing a great job.
I agree.
Before that, at the Tax Commission, at the Ethics Commission, so a great history as far as the knowledge of what is needed for this process. So I want to turn it over to Director Kemp to talk to you a little bit about lobbying and what you need to know about what you can and can't do at the Capitol.
All right, thanks, Joe. I'm going to make sure everybody is able to see my screen. It shows it screen sharing. Okay, perfect. We'll get started. I am Ashley Kemp. I'm the director of the Ethics Commission. As Joe said, I've been there now at the commission for a decade, for coming up on 10 years. 2 months from today, it will be officially 10 years. It has been longer and more interesting than I ever could have expected. So a little bit about the Ethics Commission to start. Very brief history. From the beginning of statehood until 1990, all ethics laws in the state of Oklahoma were regulated by the state legislature. In 1989, Governor Bellman at the time wanted to review the state's constitution and convened a constitutional revision commission for that purpose to look at three main topics, one of which was ethics laws. That led to an initiative petition led by a group called Amend Our Constitution Today, or the I Acted campaign, to pass State Question 627, which would change regulation for ethics laws in the state of Oklahoma. It passed overwhelmingly on September 18th, 1990 in a runoff election. What did that do? It added the Oklahoma Ethics Commission to Oklahoma's Constitution. It added Article 29 to the Constitution, creating an independent commission that would assist regulation of ethics laws in the state of Oklahoma. So until 1990, that was entirely the purview of the legislature. From 1990 forward, it is a shared regulation between the Ethics Commission and the legislature. And this is really just in regards to state officers and employees and state level campaigns. And so I've done this chart to kind of give a visual on how that shared regulation works. So the Ethics Commission has the jurisdiction to enact laws and assign civil penalties for the violation of those laws for the conduct of state officers and employees and state campaigns. The legislature retains the ability to enact criminal penalties for conduct in those same areas. So we share that jurisdiction. The Ethics Commission has the civil side, the legislature, the criminal side. When it comes time to enforce those rules, investigate alleged violations, and prosecute and assess penalties, the Ethics Commission is kind of a one-stop shop. We create the law, we investigate alleged violations of the law, and we may prosecute through a civil lawsuit if we feel that is necessary. The legislature on the other side enacts the criminal penalties. The Attorney General and the District Attorney's offices of the state of Oklahoma investigate potential violations. And if they want to pursue criminal penalties, they can through criminal charges in the traditional criminal law process. But we share that jurisdiction, Ethics Commission on the civil side, the legislature on the criminal side. So into the fun stuff, the Ethics Commission has the duty, and there is required constitutionally, to regulate, investigate, and enforce civil laws for campaigns, state officers, and employees. This is a screenshot, part of our website. We've tried to set it up to be extremely friendly and easy to navigate. So you can go there and look by topic and pursue additional resources based on what it is that you're interested in. Generally, when we're talking money and politics, we're really concerned at the commission about transparency. So today I'll briefly mention campaigns, but we're going to primarily focus on lobbying. And I wanted to start with campaigns because primarily when you're lobbying, the lobbying activity is overwhelmingly targeting legislators and legislative staff, the governor's staff. All of those officials, all legislators are elected, representatives being elected every 2 years and senators every 4 years. And they are generally elected through campaigns for elective state office, campaign committees where they receive contributions, they make expenditures. Other political organizations receive contributions and make expenditures that are related to the campaign, maybe advocating for or against specific people or for or against specific issues. Lobbying, once that person is elected, then they may become the target of lobbying activities, which is, we'll talk about in a minute, primarily focused on communications. But as part of that, the lobbyist can provide certain gifts to state officers and employees, including legislators and the governor and governor's staff, legislative staff as well. All of that activity on the campaign side and on the lobbying side is reported to the Ethics Commission. It is public information. It's information that belongs to the citizens. It is viewable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the commission's reporting website, The Guardian. And we're going to look at what exactly The Guardian looks like here in just a minute. But that is information. How money is spent to affect public policy is information that belongs to the citizen. And so our role is to make sure that information is available quickly, and to the extent possible, we try to ensure the accuracy of the information that is published to the public. So what are we talking about in campaigns? The amount of money in campaigns is truly remarkable, and I don't have the 2022 numbers in full yet. The last reports for the 2022 calendar year were filed, or were actually due yesterday. 9% are still outstanding as of this morning. So I went back to 2018. 2018 gubernatorial election year saw over $160 million in activity just in the calendar year of the election. So that doesn't include any activity that was in 2017, the year preceding the election, or 2016, because a lot of these campaigns start fundraising early. But altogether, roughly $80 million raised, $80 million spent just in that singular calendar year. And by the preliminary numbers I have, that the 2022 election will actually surpass that. I don't know by how much, but I do expect for it to be a little higher. The other funds we were talking about, lobbying expenditures. And so the lobbyists do report to the commission. And in calendar year 2022, just about $500,000 was provided in gifts and meals to state officers and employees by lobbyists and their clients. So I'll start off with something that isn't actually an ethics role, but it's something that everybody needs to know if you are engaged in lobbying and you are considering making campaign contributions during legislators and legislative candidates during session. Can you do that? Absolutely not. This is not an ethics rule. It is a criminal statute created by the legislature, as we discussed a minute ago. It is not enforced by the commission, but by the attorney general and the district attorneys. There are criminal penalties. Well, so that's a good question, and I'll come back to that here at the end. But independent expenditures is really specific campaign activity. And I think I know what you're getting at, Stephen, so I'll come back to that here in a minute. That blackout period will start the first Monday in February, so this coming Monday, and prohibits any contributions to legislators, legislative candidates from lobbyists, legislative liaisons, and their clients. It does not apply to political action committees, which is sometimes misunderstood, but it would apply to a PAC if that specific PAC has a lobbyist. So just to be mindful, you cannot give, if you are a lobbyist, you cannot give to legislators during legislative session. So turning specifically to lobbying. From the Ethics Commission website, under State Officers and Employees, there's a hyperlink to lobbying. And when you click on that, you get this screen down in the bottom right-hand side, and that has many of the resources we have available for lobbyists, the reporting calendars, a guide that explains the ethics laws in plain language with examples, and then some information on fees and compliance. But this gray box right down at the bottom, view reports or file reports, that's how you can access the Guardian system very quickly from our website. This lobbyist guide that I was speaking about, we revised it last year to really kind of condense the information and make it more relevant to the kind of feedback we get from the community, and to address questions and to explain how does the really lobbyist relationship work with state officers and employees. So lobbying generally means any oral or written communication with regards to any policies of state government. So formulation, modification, interpretation, amendment, enactment, any of those things regarding state policy. Lobbyists generally represent a lobbyist principal, their clients. They may have just one client, they may have multiple clients. It just depends on their relationship and how they are structured. But the lobbyist files reports disclosing both their own expenditures and also those of their clients. So the lobbyist will register, they will identify that they are in fact the lobbyist, they will identify the clients that they represent, and then they will file routine expenditure reports disclosing their own expenditures and that of their clients. So in Oklahoma, a lobbyist is somebody that engages in oral and written communications on behalf of a third party, that's their lobbyist principal, for compensation. And that's going to involve anything regarding legislation, a state rule, a rate, regulation, executive order. It's a very expansive definition. And with regards to legislative session specifically, the passage, defeat, formulation, adoption, approval, veto of legislation. So lobbying is very expansive. And in Oklahoma, we recognize a couple of different types of lobbying. We have legislative lobbying, which is lobbying activities directed specifically towards the legislative process and those involved in it, the governor, the legislature, and their staff. But we also recognize that there is executive lobbying, which is where lobbyists may lobby executive agencies and their officers and their employees as well. And that's completely independent of legislative lobbying. And then we have some lobbyists that engage in both legislative and executive lobbying. The three types of lobbyists: legislative liaisons, and executive lobbyists. Legislative liaisons I haven't mentioned before, but that's state officers and employees that are also lobbying the legislature. So a lobbyist, by definition, is somebody that is not a state officer or employee that lobbies the legislature or the executive branch agencies. And a legislative liaison is a state officer employee that engages in very similar activity as a lobbyist, but is in fact a state officer. Who is not a lobbyist? Individuals who are not paid to lobby. If a person is not paid to lobby, if they are not otherwise compensated to lobby, then they are not required to register and report with the Ethics Commission as to their activities. Also not a lobbyist, federal officials acting in their official capacity, and individuals whose lobbying activities are only incidental to and not a significant part of the services provided by the individual to the lobbyist principal. Now that comes up occasionally. And if that is a question that you have, whether or not you are maybe a lobbyist and need to register, please call my office. We will assist you with that. We also accept out people who are not, or who are only interacting with the legislature by providing testimony. So either they're just providing testimony as to something in a legislative hearing, that in and of itself is not going to make you a lobbyist. Lobbyist principals, that's going to be somebody that is has hired a lobbyist, has hired an individual to represent their interests with the state officials, and it can include a state agency. When interacting with a legislator or any other state official as a lobbyist, the lobbyist is required to identify themselves and their lobbyist principal. So in the example I have, hi, I'm Jane Smith. I'm a lobbyist for XYZ Inc. That is required under the ethics rules. That provides notice to the person being lobbied that they are the target of lobbying activities, that they are talking with somebody who is compensated to impact policy. And that provides very valuable information to the legislator or to the state official with which they're talking about and on whose behalf they are representing, interacting with that particular state official, because they may be representing multiple lobbyist principals. And so they are required to identify both who they are, and then which client they are interacting with that state official on that state official's behalf. If for some reason the lobbyist does not introduce themselves and identify their lobbyist principles, we do have an ethics law that requires or provides that a state officer employee can at any time ask the person they are talking with if they are a lobbyist, and it is a state law that that person must respond truthfully, accurately, and disclose that they are in fact a lobbyist and on whose behalf they are interacting. So what do lobbyists, if you are a lobbyist, what are you required to do here in Oklahoma? You're required to register with the commission. And we actually just completed renewal registration or registration for 2022. And that's people who know they're going to be registering to lobby and actually engaging in lobbying activities during 2023. Sorry, I said 2022. Still haven't switched over to the new calendar year. And they register online in the Guardian system. If it's a new lobbyist, somebody that didn't think they were going to be lobbying, they can still register even after our registration window, but they have to do it within 5 days of lobbying. And as lobbyists pick up new clients throughout the legislative session or throughout the year, they're required to amend their lobbying registrations to identify those new clients, because the commission is interested in having accurate information available to the public, timely and accurate information, and that includes timely and accurately identifying on whose behalf you're being compensated to influence state policy. Those lobbyists will file regular reports disclosing all expenses and verifying if they did not have any expenses. So that comes up somewhat frequently. If they don't have any expenses and they don't file a report, then clearly we should know they didn't have any expenses. And that's not accurate. It just means you haven't filed your report, but we need that verification that in fact, no expenditures are made by that lobbyist or their clients during that specific period. And what's reported? Lobbyist gifts. So generally in Oklahoma, that's going to be food and beverage, and then special event gifts, and then gifts from the lobbyist principal. So to register in the Guardian, you can access it, as I said, from our website. You go to the registration, you select the lobbyist or liaison, and then complete that registration form and submit it to the commission. The commission staff reviews it and approves it. And then I'll just talk about legislative lobbying specifically, since that's the legislative session's about to start. Legislative liaisons and lobbyists will log in monthly. They can log in daily if they want, but they have reports due monthly during legislative session. Today is actually the first as reporting period for 2023, the 1st through the 5th. They have 5 days to file a report for the prior month. So right now, lobbyists will be filing the reports for the month of January. And the reporting is very straightforward. You click a button to identify if it's an expenditure by the lobbyists themselves or if they're reporting an expenditure by one of their clients. And then you select from a drop-down box the categories, and then you fill in the information. And the Guardian system keeps track of all that information, and the lobbyists will then verify it's true and accurate. They file their reports, and the second that report is filed, it is available to the public to review. On the public facing side, if you want to see information in the Guardian system about lobbyists, this is where you go. You go to the search feature in the Guardian system, the search tab, you select from the drop-down box lobbyists, and then you can look at the lobbyists, the recipients, expenditures. You can enter as much or as little data as you want on this search field, and it will pull a search for you. And if the results are too many, you can start adding information to those data fields to narrow that. For lobbyist principals, it's very similar. You can look at what lobbyist principals are registered in the state of Oklahoma and what agencies that they're registered to lobby. And then, of course, the expenditures. On the expenditure details, you can actually narrow down, if you're just interested to know how, the example here, how much in meals and other food and beverage are being purchased for individuals, you can, during this certain time frame from July to December, you can do that. You can enter in that data and it will display two things. One, it'll give you a summary of exactly how much was spent during that time frame, and then it will give you an itemized list. You can export that list to an Excel file, to a PDF file. You can print it out directly. And once you have those lists in Excel, you can do whatever you want with them. You can create tables, you can manipulate the data to get the information that you really are looking for. Under the Guardian, another useful search feature is what we call the Quick Stats feature. That's circled here. It provides things like this handy pie table that's updated as reports are filed automatically. But you can also click this More Quick Stats button above those grids, which provides what I think are really useful top 10 lists. And that's going to always tell us what, as of today, as of the second you click the button, who are the top 10 in any specific category. Top 10 lobbyist expenditures, top 10 legislative recipients of gifts. And it's not just limited to that. There is a way to expand that list to include all the data in the Guardian system, but the default display is the first 10 that are listed. There are also lists available for the campaign side on the same page. I just am focusing on the lobbyist side. So you can see lobbyist principal expenditures, lobbyist expenditures, and then legislator and non-legislator recipients. So what kind of gifts are permitted and not permitted under the state of Oklahoma laws? Nothing's permitted unless it's specifically allowed by rule. And you're not allowed to provide gifts to family members of a regulated individual to influence that person. So you can't give an indirect gift to a state officer employee by providing it to a family member. We do have exceptions on regulating relationships that are what we call pre-existing relationships. So for example, a lobbyist and a legislator were college roommates, their families vacation together, they've always gone, exchange birthday presents, Christmas presents. Is that the type of relationship we really as a public are interested in? Not really. We're really interested in relationships that have developed as a result of the status of a state officer or employee and the status of a lobbyist or liaison. And so somebody with that type of pre-existing relationship can apply to the commission to have that recognized, and exempts them from the reporting of those types of gifts. Our gift limits in Oklahoma are pretty high compared to other regions. So $500 a year per lobbyist per state officer employee, up to $100 of that $500 limit may be for what we call major life events. That's pretty rare. And then a $10 trinket gift can be given one time a year for a lobbyist, liaison, lobbyist principal. Every gift, every meal for a legislator by a lobbyist is aggregated together. So you can do one $100 meal or five $500 meals, I suppose, or as many as you want until you get to that $500 limit. Lobbyist principal events, these are group events. So a lobbyist principal cannot generally just take a legislator out to dinner or a state officer employee one-on-one. that is not an allowable gift, but what they can do are sponsor group events. So events to which all members of the legislature are invited, recognized caucus events, out-of-state events, subcommittee events. Those can be done one time per calendar year per lobbyist principal. There is no limit on the amount that's spent, but it is fully disclosed by the lobbyist on the lobbyist reports. Plaques, trophies, similar items suitable for display can also be provided by lobbyist principals. Has to be an acknowledgement of a state officer employee's public service, one time per calendar year, not more than $200. And the key here is it does have to be something that's suitable for display, such as a plaque or a trophy. An exclusion, coffee, donuts, those modest items given occasionally that are not part of the meal, given occasionally is key. Cupcake Thursdays would not be something that's given occasionally because it's being provided on a weekly basis. So while modest items given occasionally that are not part of a meal are excluded from the gift limits altogether, that is to facilitate really the state officer's employees' comfort in being able to engage in meetings and accept a glass of water, a cup of coffee, to assist in those activities, but it is not meant to be a loophole around the gift rules. All records of lobbyist expenditures have to be kept for 4 years. And at any time, the commission can go and ask the lobbyist or the lobbyist principal for those records, and they're required to provide them by law. What happens if you exceed contribution limits, either on the giving or receiving side, or don't file on time? There are a couple of different ways the commission enforces its rules. One is by an administrative process where I, as the director, can assess fees up to $1,000, or for egregious conduct, formal complaints and investigations through the commission. Those are prosecuted in district court, and fines begin at $5,000. So generally, that's not, it is very rare for something to get to the point where it's filed in district court and we're seeking a $5,000 or more penalty. Generally, the bulk of our enforcement is in the administrative process. I'm going to stop there and let anybody that wants to ask questions. I'll start with this first one. How does this apply with independent expenditures? That was related to the blackout period. An independent expenditure isn't a contribution. By definition, an independent expenditure is an advertisement provided by, well, really anybody that's advocating the election or defeat of a specific candidate. That doesn't come up very often during the legislative session because it's candidate specific and our elections have already occurred by the time legislative session has occurred. So if that does not answer your question, please provide a follow-up. And I will answer any other questions people have.
Ashley, let me ask a question for this.
Okay.
For something like this where a ticket was charged, does that count for an organization as an invitation if the lawmakers have to pay?
Does that count as a gift? Technically. So we do have an exception. I just realized I don't have on here. I probably need to add a slide. To include informational materials. So we created a new exception in the rules a couple of years ago for informational materials that will assist a state officer or employee in performing their job. And whether or not a ticket, for example, to an educational event is going to fall within an informational, under that informational exception, I don't know. That'd be a great question for the commission to be asked.
I know if in future we would like to invite legislators to be a part of this so they can learn to do their jobs better. So that's something I will get with you and draft up a request.
That's great. I'd appreciate it.
And that's one of the things I want to remind people too. Always ask. Ashley and her team are fantastic to work with. If you're in doubt, ask in advance. I've had to beg forgiveness before, so it's better to ask in advance.
Well, we prefer for you to ask in advance also. And if there's any way that we can get you to where you can engage in the conduct you want to engage in within the rules, we're going to tell you how to do it. Sometimes it's not intuitive on how to get there. Sometimes the direction and the mechanism you want to use to get there will violate an ethics rule or any number of ethics rules, but there's another path we can take. And we can talk through that. And as long as we're doing that in advance, we're not going to have a problem, and we can avoid a lot of headache and time, your own time and my staff's time, by just spending 5 minutes usually talking in advance. If for some reason you realize, having seen this presentation, that you have violated some ethics rules, you can also give me a call and we'll figure out how to get you in compliance as quickly and easily as possible.
And I can attest to that because I had to do that once.
It happens. I mean, it happens, and we just want to get that information available to the public as quickly as possible, get everything fixed as quickly as possible, and get everybody into compliance just as quickly as possible with the ethics laws.
We've got a couple of minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? Ashley, this has been wonderful. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and best of luck with the upcoming session.
All right. Thank you. And you too, Joe.